You do see this explosion in the rate of experiments. And I think one thing we encountered internally within LinkedIn is as people are able to develop features so much more quickly, they want to be able to run experiments that much more quickly on our internal A/B testing platform. And the gaps on our internal experiment platform have really become a bottleneck. So actually, I just switched to an internal role rebuilding the A/B testing platform here at LinkedIn.
That was Dawn Woodward, distinguished engineer at LinkedIn, on how the sheer speed of AI-driven feature development is turning traditional A/B testing platforms into a primary bottleneck for innovation. And this isn't a one-off. As we're discovering, AI adoption is putting a huge strain on traditional infrastructure, to say the least. In this episode of High Signal, Duncan and I have the pleasure of being joined by a powerhouse panel of data leaders: Dawn Woodward, Andreas Bucchi from LATAM Airlines, and Jeremy Herman, CEO and co-founder of Delphina. We navigate the shifts hitting the worlds of data science, analytics, and BI as the industry adopts conversational querying, AI-assisted data science and software development, and AI more generally at scale. We dive into the sobering reality of the source of truth problem and discuss why semantic ambiguity kills AI utility and why the role of the analyst is shifting from data wrangler to a verifier of technical outputs. The group also explores why traditional fundamentals like strict data cataloging and upstream validation are actually more critical now than they were in the pre-AI era. We also dig into the core limitations of LLMs, questioning whether next token predictors can ever achieve true causal inference or if they're simply destined to imitate the sophisticated workflows of the humans who master them. If you enjoy these conversations, please leave us a review. Give us 5 stars, subscribe to the newsletter, and share it with your friends. Links are in the show notes. I'm Hugo Bown-Anderson, and welcome to High Signal. I'm so excited to really jump into what's happening in AI and how it impacts the work in analytics and data we've all been doing and interested in since before the generative AI era hit. And I'd actually love to jump in to talk about the impact we're seeing AI is having on analytics. And Dawn, I'd really be interested in your thoughts on this. You're distinguished engineer at LinkedIn. I'm not telling you what you do, actually. I'm doing this for the benefit of others. You were at Uber for over 7 years as Senior Director of Applied Science and Data Science for platforms, among other things. Not only that, you've been an associate professor with tenure at Cornell, so you've seen such a wide array of things. And I'm wondering, with your experience in data and what you're doing now, what have you seen happening to traditional analytics and BI tools and data warehouses in the AI era now? How are things changing?
Well, we obviously seeing this evolution from traditional tooling to tools that allow for natural language, conversational querying of data sources. So obviously, it's a big shift in the industry. On one hand, it's really easy for people to create these sorts of tools. So, for example, I vibe coded an app over a couple of days that does open-ended analysis of publicly available data. You can ask a question like, what's the pattern over the course of the week for taxi trips in New York City? And it'll give you a nice little plot and give you the code and so on. So it's incredibly easy to build a tool like this. But then there's a question about what does it take to make it actually be correct, which is a different level of nuance. And so, for example, this challenge of identifying what is the source of truth data for a particular query becomes a really important one, because at Uber, for example, we had initially some 4 different definitions of member sessions or user sessions. Okay, so which of those 4 user sessions, and they're all named things like user sessions, rider sessions, blah, blah. And so from an AI perspective, it's difficult to distinguish between what's the correct source of truth data for something, a concept like user sessions. And so it becomes more important to have those sorts of annotations for data internally is one consequence. I'd be curious what the other folks in the panel think about, like, what are the other guardrails that you need in order to make sure that these tools are correct?
Yeah, I'd love to hear how you're thinking about this, Andreas, particularly as you've been scaling and bringing a data functionality into LATAM, which has been massive for so long as well.
Yeah, so I think we have the challenge of taking a 100-year-old company that is massive, as you say. It's the largest airline network in Latin America, by a considerable extent, and trying to tackle the same issues that Don proposes. One of the things that we've realized is that there are some things that change over the, next 6 months, right? AI is reasonably good at A. In 6 more months, it will be good at A, definitely, right? Maybe not in the exact shape, but to some extent. But there are some things that are required, right? So we focused our efforts on those. For instance, really high quality catalog, being very strict with the quality of documentation. I think that now more than ever, big engineering teams miss not being kind of lint savvy or organized with their code. Organized code works really well with AIs. The same thing goes to data. And the other thing that we realized is that verifiable outputs are key. So what you end up doing is you prefer to, let's say, delegate to AI anything that can be easily verifiable first, right? So, for instance, some of the processes that we've automated are legal processes, right? Where you can actually have some output that's easily verifiable. Of course, code is one of those, but analytics as well. We've been working on generating high-quality analysis for hypothesis development, and you can easily verify if it's actually a sound chain of thought, and there is information behind the claims, and then you just put that into the funnel for a bunch of other hypotheses that you can test. So there is a kind of very broad space to pick these kind of processes, and that definitely helps. But there is a big gap in making sure that something is a good output when things are maybe a bit more blurry.
Absolutely. And I think testing and verifiability, to your point, and how you've extended, Andres, are so critical. Jeremy, I'd love your thoughts on this, particularly as you built and then were head of machine learning platform Michelangelo at Uber for 4 years, and now you're building Delphina. So I'm wondering from your perspective, what type of shift is happening?
Yeah, I mean, it's, obviously revolutionizing software engineering and expect the same to happen, kind of top to bottom with analytics and data science. Right now, one of the things we wrestle with a lot is how to give feedback and kind of back pressure to the LLMs and make sure they kind of stay on track. In the coding world, you have kind of linters and things that check the code and give it feedback. And in the data world, we've been finding various forms of evals where you have kind of trusted numbers that you can both offline kind of measure the agent against, but also reference points for live analysis that it can kind of double check and kind of gut check its answers against to make sure that it's staying on track.
Without a doubt. And the other thing I'm interested in, we're talking about things that were already possible for the most part. And I think the tools we have now, increasingly, we can do things a lot more quickly, such as Dawn mentioned. She was able to vibe code this app in a couple of days. But it also seems like we're able to do things and dream of things and execute on them that we were never even able to do before. So I'm wondering if any of you want to chat about how it's expanding what is possible also.
Yeah, so I'll jump in. One of the things that we've seen is that we can probably rearrange how teams work. So to be more detailed on this, data engineering, if you think about the role in the running or the building, you have like different blocks where you produce, right? And probably it's very difficult for AI to grab all of those. But in some places, if you kind of shift the process around, like if you add validation, like strong validation first, then downstream data quality is easy to maintain. And those things weren't really doable before. You would probably get a pipeline and a better set of composed data, right? Not raw data. And that at some point you would validate the quality of that information. Now you can probably turn things a bit around and make those things much, much easier. So we've improved the quality and the speed of our data engineering teams considerably. We've shrunk 20% of our data engineering teams, and of course, move them to places where we needed speeding up. The same thing we've seen with the analytical capabilities. So I remember I heard this at Uber at some point, like a good data person, if there's anything like that, has 3 qualities. One is data wrangling, the other is some level of stats, and the other is communication or business acumen or let's say storytelling with data, right? Mm-hmm. All of those have increased probably in a step change. It's difficult to understand to what level different roles are able to do independent things with data, but we've seen an impressive advance in the quality of open-ended question analysis and our capability of those teams to actually verify things. If the data quality is really good, you usually get really close ballpark figures. I mean, it's astounding. I've done the research myself and contrasted it with some things that the AI brings over, and it's astounding, right? And that wasn't doable before. It would take a long time for you to output or produce something like that. I'm actually concerned that the bottleneck is now further down the line. Like, we are not going to be able to decide properly what to do with all the things that we figured out.
I'm actually curious, as you say that, Andres, there's kind of this opportunity, obviously, to really democratize data analysis for not only the data functions, but to broader cross-functional stakeholders and leaders and executives. And there's this kind of interesting thing now where it used to be you would go ask a data analyst a question, and they would kind of help you formulate that question as something actually that you could properly answer with the data. Now we see kind of leaders having access to GenAI and being able to ask questions themselves. And potentially they have to start actually learning how to ask the right questions and become much more data literate. And so curious for thoughts on how we're seeing the data literacy of non-technical stakeholders change with the advent of AI, and whether that's expediting that literacy and whether they're ready for it. Dawn, over to you.
That's a great question. I would say there's a lot of eagerness and people jumping in for sure. I think there's still a little ways to go in terms of people knowing whether what they're getting is right. So that comes back to one of the points that I talked about before. I think there's a lot more people generating ideas and then getting some data about those ideas and sending it my way and saying, hey, it looks like, and then they jump to a conclusion that then sometimes I have to go back with them and do a bit of iteration on, okay, but this is a biased analysis because of X, Y, and Z. Let's take a closer look. So I think it leads to a lot of eagerness and more engagement for sure. And then when it comes to basic queries, at this point, I think also I'm able to push people to self-serve around a lot of that stuff more than we could before.
Nice.
Yep. So connecting with Don, we've seen the same thing at Altam. I surely hope there's more of this. We have KPIs that we are a traditional company, so we set KPIs for anything. So we have this team maturity index in terms of data, right? So it measures adoption and how leveraged they are using AI on specific tools that do actually perform an analysis and not just help me review this email, right? And we see progress, let's say, in a group of people. So there is a long tail, and there is a group of people that's probably lagging behind. The thing is that the technology is improving so fast that even those people actually progress over time. But if I had to get my wish, right, my one single wish, I think that at some point what data teams or more technical teams should be able to provide to non-technical teams is the tools to kind of narrow down their research. So let me give you a very concrete example. Every single week, you need to review thousands of signals that the planes emit when something is kind of off bounds. Doesn't mean that it's dangerous, right? But you'd rather look at that, right? If you think about giving assistance to each single person that reviews this, then you get productivity increases, right? Good ones, but it's not noticeable. If you provide the AI with the capabilities of kind of a broader filtering, right? And you are really thorough with that, and then you get a narrower space for searching for specific things, then the productivity is tenfold. There's an order of magnitude right away. And that's something that was really difficult to achieve before. And I think that AI has opened that space, but we still need to understand how to scale that up because we have some interesting cases where it happens. We need to make sure that we understand how to scale it.
I love all of this, and in particular the way that AI can help with data literacy across technical and non-technical stakeholders. I think there's an interesting gotcha in that AI can help with these things, yet there's an intersection with the need for AI literacy as well. So not only is it expanding data literacy, but people need to know the capabilities and gotchas with AI. So I wonder, Jeremy, particularly with respect to what you're working on at Delphina, how you think about making sure that people know what AI is capable of and what you shouldn't be doing with it at the moment.
Yeah. But it was funny, like a lot of people show up and don't even know what to ask in the beginning. And so there is some effort to even just have suggested questions, a lot of the same things in ChatGPT to help people break the ice and get going. We actually generally find that once they engage and start asking questions, then the snowball starts rolling and they get excited and kind of are able to explore, what's possible, and that kind of feeds on itself. We have, on the Delphina side, we've kind of initially limited it what it can do to constrain it to kind of trustworthy, space of answers that we believe are good, but then quickly are kind of expanding that, as the model improves and as our technology improves. And so, within the space of Delphina, the idea is that you can ask questions and trust the answers. But I do think people are also understanding that AI, like people, can sometimes make mistakes and how to be cognizant of that and recognize that. On the tool side, too, not only showing the final answer, but also trying to show the detailed steps that got there, both code level, but also kind of narrative level, helps folks make sure that what the AI is doing is actually what they intended.
Totally. And I love that you mentioned some of the things that start to change as the models get better. We've had several episodes recently, one with Nick Moy from DeepMind, who actually built the first multi-step agent at Windsurf. And their story is fascinating, particularly with respect to how the product they wanted to build, they just couldn't. And then a new model came out and they could build it that day. And I'm wondering, Dawn and Andreas, just with the new model capabilities, particularly late last year with Opus 4.5 and Gemini 3, and perhaps, what's coming soon, how do you think about the democratization of AI, particularly with non-technical people, when models are getting better so quickly?
Well, it's definitely hugely empowering when it comes to building, right? And so we used it a lot internally for a recent Hack Week, for example, and there were a ton of AI-powered features that people were building. But at the same time, I think we're still pushing on being able, those tools being able to architect things well. So if you need a very simple app, a very simple feature, right, it can build that. But the more that you iterate and with the coding agent, if you use something like Replit, for example, it tends to go down into these rabbit holes from a design perspective and do strange things that end up compounding and leading to very weird consequences and buggy experiences and so on. So it's incredibly powerful. And I think the capabilities are so great that it makes you want more. And the more that I want is that ability to architect something and for it to actually do a good job. And it's just not quite there yet. And so I think that's where I'm trying to push it, right? So I want better code reviews at this stage. And maybe it's just I'm not using the right set of tools. I think we're all just trying to pick and choose the right tools for drafting the PRs, the right tools for reviewing the PRs, the right tools for planning the code changes in sequence that we need to have done. But I feel like I really have to keep an eye on things along the way as it's executing to make sure it doesn't do really stupid things. And I ask, why didn't you just design it like that? And it says, yeah, you're right. That's how I should have done it.
I totally agree. And I do think the code review question is still very challenging. What I've found, and I know other people have, is adversarial code reviews, getting different models. It seems like models are more lenient on their own code than on the code of other models. And I think Codex is one that people have found generally very good for code review on Claude output. Andreas, to that point, I'm interested in your thoughts on, Dawn mentioned something really fundamental and important here, that it will just do all of this stuff and stuff that it said it won't do in the previous message as well. So I'm wondering your thoughts on these tools and how you think about them at LATAM when they'll do things that they say they won't, and helping your team and the broader organization use them usefully, knowing this.
So I think that there are different levels of users. I think that we would be talking about the more state-of-the-art users here inside of LATAM, which is a big bunch of people, but that kind of tooling. I think that there was a noticeable change when in the approach when anti-gravity came out. They tried to kind of flip the table. It's like now the agent's going to be kind of first, right? And you can view the code, but the agent's first. They did it kind of well, it was a good idea. I think that Cloud Code happened to also release a model that's really good at this. So they took the lead, and now Codex made the same move. I think that yesterday or today they released Codex for desktop. I don't remember, but it's actually kind of the same idea. So it's mainly an agent and then the code, right? I think that opened the door to a ton of stuff. And yes, we see a lot of garbage produced. But if you think about the less you can now aspire, like the moonshot, of course you're going to probably miss. But if you aim to kind of 2 blocks away, something that would have taken you 2 weeks takes you a day. And we have a ton of those examples that add a really high volume of value. I think that the important part here is to make sure that those pieces connect really quickly to value, to company value, right? And that requires kind of a different thinking aspect of what this technology enables, right? You need to make sure that business opportunities kind of bubble up the technical differences between what we have and what we should have, and then use AI to bridge that gap. We have examples with we needed to understand how different sets of information would correlate, right? So there are a lot of regulations in the middle, like it's really tricky. But technically, you can achieve that through like private set intersections, stuff like that. So you need to build a really complex system. So we have people that understand that producing a system that will scale would be really expensive. And AI just tackled this really quickly in a day or two, and you have the experts, they can review. And it's full of examples that like that one. So definitely, I agree. If you aim for the moonshot, you're going to miss. It's going to be an interesting ride, but probably not going to produce anything valuable. But there's so many opportunities that seem impossible to, like, prohibitively expensive to close 2 years ago that now are a breeze. You should focus on those for sure.
Shifting gears a little bit, I think everyone here is passionate about experimentation and measurement, and potentially GenAI could really revolutionize experimentation, both in helping to create traditional experiments and even identify hypotheses or explore the data, to proposing new experiments on its own, and furthermore, creating even more variants of experiments. If the GenAI can, as a simple example, create marketing copy that's actually quite compelling. Curious, Dawn, you've been super close to experimentation space for a long time. If you can talk a little bit about how you're seeing that playing field evolve and where we might go.
You do see this explosion in the rate of experiments. And I think one thing we encountered internally within LinkedIn is as people are able to develop features so much more quickly, they want to be able to run experiments that much more quickly on our internal A/B testing platform. And we just started hitting some limits around, not so much around can the platform scale, it can absolutely scale, but the bottlenecks that we had before around hitting a lot of statistical bias issues using the internal platform is something that's become prohibitive for us and really starting to block our development. So it put the bottleneck in a different place. Like being able to develop the features and develop new model variants and so on is happening a lot faster. And because of that, the gaps on our internal experiment platform have really become a bottleneck. So actually, I just switched to an internal role rebuilding the A/B testing platform here at LinkedIn. It's a fun journey because it's something that we did.
Not the first time you've done this.
and so it's interesting because it's such building an A/B testing platform is subtle. It's statistically interesting. And it's just surprising that in the world of GenAI, that's what I needed to go back and do, right? But it just turned out that was the bottleneck, because I think what ends up happening is with all this creativity, right, you still need to have some sort of measurement of what's better, right? So what's better? And you can do lots of AI evals. And so in terms of like, how do we measure offline? That's shifted if you have traditional recommender systems, for example. You might have AUC metrics or other kinds of offline quality metrics for the ranking system. But in the generative AI world, we have these more conversational interfaces and much more qualitative. And so it switches to more of an AI based evaluation of this conversational experience. So the world of offline evaluation changes a lot as the types of models change, but this need for an A/B testing platform doesn't seem to have changed at all. And in fact, it became the bottleneck, which is an interesting dynamic.
That's fascinating.
Which kind of makes sense, actually, because you think the AI is good at generating lots of options and you need a evaluator to pick the best ones. And so it makes a lot of sense to invest in the platform than pick the better answers. Yeah.
And so are you seeing like more arms in each experiment, or is it actually just sheer count of experiments that's grown, or is it both of those things?
It's both of those things. And this gets into nuances of how our experiment platform is built internally, but we made it like difficult to, for example, tear down an experiment and replace it with a new experiment with the same configuration. And so because of that, people have these like long-lived experiments and they're just adding more and more arms to these experiments, and they're not re-randomizing experiments, and it's very chaotic in terms of evaluation. There's a real understanding internally that this is a problem. So I'm not saying people don't understand that these practices are an issue, but because of the way we architected our A/B testing platform, it just turns out to be very, very painful on the ground. And I think our AI engineers and product engineers and more are spending 15% of their time babysitting experiments, and none of this is necessary. I mean, experiment can be just as easy as pressing a button, do a little configuration and let it run for a couple of days and then run an analysis. This does not have to be hard, but there's an unfortunate situation where at large tech companies typically develop their own A/B testing platform internally. And so everyone that I've encountered has issues with statistical problems that have occurred because we missed some things when we were building the platform. And at some point you have to go back and fix those things. And so this is the second time I've ended up doing this. It's kind of funny.
Something
That's
I'm
amazing.
hearing in that it's such early days, and yet you've been doing such forward-thinking work at LinkedIn. I wonder, and not necessarily with respect to what you're up to at LinkedIn, but your thoughts on the near to medium term future of automating most of these types of things, idea generation all the way through to evaluation, and having some sort of, I suppose, evaluator optimizer loop with a human there to, of course, help with guardrails and that type of stuff. But how much of this will be automatable in the next year, do you think?
So we're not there yet. And again, I'm always the person who I want more, and we're not there. I feel AI is an amazing thought partner. I can brainstorm with AI. I can give AI very specific instructions about what I want it to implement, and it'll do a halfway decent job. And as long as I keep an eye on things along the way, it'll provide something useful. But do I think that we're at the point where we can automate the full cycle? I just think that there's a lot of human judgment that still ends up going in to the process. And maybe we could just solve that with pure brute force. I mean, maybe if the AI if we just let it run enough distinct experiments, then it'll get to a good enough outcome. But at this stage and in the next 6 to 12 months, I still feel like that human judgment about what we should try next is still quite important.
Agreed. But I think you could imagine a proactive agent that comes to you daily and asks you the questions, downloads the things it needs to do what it does. Of course, there's a big challenge with what actually happens in the context, how forgetful they are, and how full on they are in executing on things that you never told it to do as well. So these challenges still remain, presumably due to a lot of the post-training as well. But I'm wondering, Andreas, how you think about experimentation more generally at LATAM at the moment as well, with respect to AI.
Yeah, so I think that we are on the other corner of the street, right? So I wish I had the problem that the bottleneck is the experiments. I see in my case, that's probably the case for a lot of companies around the world that are not in tech. We have a long way to go until that happens, right? And if you look at the volume of customers and interactions we have, we are just not taking advantage of the volume of opportunities we have to actually test an hypothesis that we think might change or influence a behavior. And that's a huge volume of data that we are just letting go. And these technologies will help us do that. We are implementing this as part of the product development life cycle, and we've seen improvement. But it's not fully automated yet. We want to automate most of it. But on the other hand, I think that some industries are exposed to the other side of the coin. And this one keeps me up at night, so I really hope to hear your thoughts on this. But so what we've seen is that introducing these AIs as a tool is also a tool for the society, right? So the customer the expectation of the customer is going to change. Right? They will probably likely expect some level of intelligent interaction with any kind of product or service at some point. So that begs the question, like, will be experiments designed for humans or AIs? Some portion at least, right? Will AIs rather, they kind of personalize to their users, their humans' needs? I don't know if that's the correct way to say this. And they just ask for your inventory. It's like, let me decide. Do we experiment it there? Like, or we just kind of stay away? Is that an engineering problem, a behavioral problem? So that keeps me up at night because it might happen sooner than later. I'm already surprised every single month of how fast this is going. And yeah, that's gonna probably catch a lot of companies offside, and they're not going to be able to figure out quickly what to do.
Now it's time for a quick break. I'm here with Duncan Gilchrist from Delphina, and I just want to congratulate you on the launch, Duncan. For folks listening and or watching, you've just opened up a public sandbox. Can you tell us a bit about it?
So heading into March Madness this week, we made Delphina available as a free public sandbox. Anyone can use Delphina's data agent to create or analyze their basketball bracket. We've uploaded over a decade of Division I play-by-play game data and also polymarket, prediction market data, both updated every day. You can get pretty wild with Delphina, even doing Monte Carlo simulations and making forecasts with scikit-learn. Check it out at delphinaai/NCAA.
I also saw you just published a case study with Substack. That's awesome. What can you tell us about it?
You know, Substack's been a great partner. One of our business theses is that there's a tremendous amount of latent demand for analytics within enterprises, that most people at a company never even touch their data, not because they don't want to, but because the tools are just way too hard. At Substack, over a third of the company is now asking Delphina data questions every week. They estimate the number of questions business users are asking is up fivefold. It's really an exciting time for data.
So something we've been talking directly to, particularly with respect to online experimentation, is measurement and evaluation. I'm wondering how you all are thinking about and how we or can be thinking about evaluation more generally. For example, you can ask the question like, how do organizations know if AI really works or is effective? And I'm wondering what the variance of the challenge is. So you mentioned verifiability earlier, Andres, and it's kind of somewhat easy to measure on well-defined simple problems, harder for longer running workflows. So how do you think about evaluation of these things more generally? And I'm wondering if Dawn, you'd like to kick it off.
I mean, evaluation of conversational experiences is I think there's a large literature at this point, so maybe I won't go deep into that. I think there are a lot of different creative ways to evaluate quality in that space. One thing that I think is still really important is, okay, you have these complex systems that we build. You're talking about a large enterprise, for example, like a LinkedIn or a Microsoft, right? And we have all of these different components, and there are teams building each of these components. And I feel like you still do need to have some way to know whether each of those components is separately doing its job in a way that when they're combined, they will provide the service that you want to provide, right? And so you still need to have a definition of some kind of KPI, some kind of quality measure for a particular system, or output measure, right? That measures, is this particular component playing its designated role within this larger ecosystem? And I haven't yet found a way to automate that. I would love to hear from you guys if you have, but there's a bit of an art to doing this. And I think that aspect of like, it's super important to be able to know whether the AI is giving us something meaningful, right? And so as we build these systems, is it doing what we expect it to do? And so we still seem to need this definition of measurement for each component system, offline and online.
So we're a very traditional company in one of the origins, and KPIs are paramount, right? So everything needs to be measured and validated or supported by some level of impact, so it's financed, even if it's high risk. In that sense, I think that a lot of companies are going to be subject to this, and they are going to bias towards measurable outcomes, right? So you will have AI embedded in workflows that have verifiable artifacts. We call them artifacts. I don't know if it's the best way to call them, but you see that organizations to some extent define that they progress or they generate value with technical outputs, be it code, again, like contracts, analysis, etc., right? Some of those are easily verifiable, and if you stitch those together in an end-to-end workflow, then it's monetizable. You can actually measure if it's you improved, you're spending less, etc. And when you see big numbers like a times 10, times 20, then you actually know that you progress. When you start moving towards AI embedded experiences, like towards customers, then it becomes a bit trickier. I think that the good thing is that if you want to modify experiences, at least in the positive side, you have experimentation, and that's inherently a verification, an empirical verification. So you have that. If you're really good at that, then AI is a plus. The problem is on the downside, right? If you don't want to inject lies or any kind of hallucination into the whole experience, right? And in South America, we have this saying, in Chile in particular, is like golpe avisa, which is kind of an euphemism for when you are going back in your car, right? And you didn't have this beep beep like honor sound. You just would like really hit, like really click, and there like you need to go forward. But you need to be very careful with the speed. You can't go full speed. You need to be very careful, like go like very, very, very slow, and then you'll figure out how far you can actually deploy these things, right? Internal deployment is a really good tool. We deploy internally a lot of the things that we want to use to interact with customers. Our platform, we have an internal platform to deploy AI. We test 90%, 95% of the things that we have deployed internally, and 5% only to the customers. We have a voice bot that's completely deployed in this technology, full observability. And we're very careful, right? We're an airline, so we are also very, very regulated, so we need to be very careful. And that's the way we progress, really slowly when it comes to customer interactions.
I think it's just kind of interesting. There's this really exciting and tricky part with AI where it's often hard to predict like what is really accomplishable with the AI. And it can do so many things that you just like couldn't do 12 months ago or 24 months ago. And so there is this kind of counterbalancing where you have to aggressively try out new things that might be possible now, knowing that actually the component parts are quite hard to verify, maybe in sequence, while also then kind of going back when it fails and figuring out like how it failed and how to ladder up to the next thing that you might try. And I think that because it's kind of counterintuitive, right? I think we all grew up in a life without this new force that can do all of these magical things that is changing every month or every couple of months. And so I do think that like on the one hand, you want to be really careful, which makes a ton of sense. On the other hand, we also think that, and we found even in our startup, that you have to push yourself to imagine what if, and then try that thing, because sometimes it actually just works out of the box. And if so, you need to know that now so you can take advantage of it.
Can you give us an example?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it would be more sophisticated KPI deep dives, actually. I mean, figuring out what drives an outlier last week in someone's KPIs. And if you do have your data relatively well structured and you have the right context, you can let a long-running agent go work at that thing and figure out what actually happened.
It sounds super useful. I'd love to try it.
So, Andres, you mentioned or hinted at authentication and all the security concerns you have at Latam. So I'm wondering, from your perspective, what are the security implications of these new technologies and how you think, essentially, what's missing in security now and what do we need to do as a broader discipline?
Yeah, okay, so I'm responsible for this. So I'm very careful with how I answer.
I came to the right place.
So one of the things that probably large companies that hold a lot of valuable data try to achieve is some scheme of permissioning that's scalable, right? For instance, hierarchical permission, as I think is at least the golden standard from my point of view. But it breaks when you put AI in the system and you don't let AI inherit permissions. Right? And that's a huge problem for a lot of the platforms. What I always tell vendors that come to Latam, I say like, no, we need to make sure that your service is headless because I want to embed your service in my middleware. That's the only way I can scale it securely because it can represent Andres Buki, right? So if I ask the AI to do something, it will run into a roadblock. if I don't have permissions to do something. Whereas if Hugo has permissions, he can go forward, right? And when you have tons and tons of data, we generate 1 terabyte a week, which is probably, compared to other companies, a small data set. But it's huge, right? And that data, there's a big portion of that that's really important for us to keep it secure and make sure that it's high quality, and not everybody can go into that. Not every process can go in there. So yeah, so I think that was one of the big investments we made. That was probably the reason where, like, we are huge partners with Google, and their products are amazing. But we chose ChatGPT as our platform for more democratized use of AI because it relied more on your middleware, because they don't have a cloud service, right? So it was easy for us to integrate these constraints into how they operate, right? Whereas Gemini is a bit more tricky. Now they are letting go of that, and I know that they are allowing us for better integration of middleware. Now the IDEs probably are going to be a huge place where you can work on analytics and perform your work locally. So that is also pretty doable to, like, throw the identity token within the whole process. Yeah, so that's key. I think if any company is thinking about scaling this and they are not tech companies, probably problem number 1, make sure that you have observability and traceability of permissions throughout the whole network. I was very careful.
Let's talk data quality. So I think data quality has always been a challenge in the old world. And all of a sudden, in the new world, not only do we have kind of traditional structured data, but we also have potentially an explosion of new kinds of data, new types of data that can be analyzed. And so curious to explore, maybe Dawn, with you, like, how do you think about data quality in this new world where everything is data and, like, multimodal is data? Everything can be ingested by these kinds of models. And so is data quality, is it kind of the same problems, or is it different now? Like, what is that world today?
So you still have these core canonical data sources, right? That part didn't change. But what happened was we incorporated all of these additional data sources that might have a little bit of signal each, but then when you pull them all together, there's something powerful there. I just think that you can do some incredibly creative things with this, and the types of user experiences that you can provide when you have open-ended kind of access of an analytics agent to be able to source and attempt to create structure from this unstructured data.
So what we're seeing is that generative AI is probably the cookie monster of data greediness, right? So we are going to, I don't know if quickly, but at some point, we're going to go extremely beyond our tabular data, which we are super happy with, and we have built our systems around that. So we realized this, and one of the problems that we're trying to tackle with Google is how do we make both worlds kind of coexist really well? Because I have hundreds of data engineers that know how to work really well with tabular data, also data scientists. I don't have a big talent pool to work on unstructured data. So how those two worlds coexist is very important for, at least for LATAM, and I'm guessing a ton of companies. And we figure out a way that probably is going to lever on the capability of extracting these little kind of pieces of signals, like you said, Don. Like, how does this object, let's say, I don't know, conversation, how does it look from this ontology, from this perspective, right? And that gives us some bits of information, but the same piece of information, the same conversation might hold other pieces of information from others' perspective, right? And that's kind of the nice capability of LLMs. Like, where you look at the data, it extracts the correct pieces of signal, hopefully, right? But that way we can connect both. In terms of quality, I think it's the same problem, but times 100. I think documentation and having examples of kind of the range that the data has, how a KPI relates to that, the onboarding process, like we discussed at some point with you guys in Delphina, is super important for AIs. So yeah, but that's the same thing that we do now, but to a much higher expectation. The other one is a new problem that we are trying to figure out what to do.
I will say, I think the opportunity to marry these types of data together, for us to actually hear, seems enormous. An example is being able to marry product usage data with customer call transcripts and understanding kind of both like the words they use with how they are literally using it and what predicts good outcomes versus bad outcomes. That's the kind of thing that just wasn't possible, I think, a couple of years ago. And now you can literally see like what it bubbles up and then use that to inform both how you work with that customer and also what you go build next.
Totally. And I love, Andreas, that you mentioned the supreme importance of being able to document and everything as well. And AI can be very good at helping with documentation as long as we're there to spot check it and make sure that it's good. There's actually a joke or a meme going around that agent skills were developed in order to get people to actually write documentation for humans also, which I kind of like. So we're going to have to wrap up soon, but I am interested in thinking through the future of data science and data roles in particular, but looking back as well. So it was nearly 15 years ago that we were told data scientists would be the sexiest job of the 21st century. And I think we've perhaps seen data science as being really impactful. At one end, of course, places like tech companies where we've seen data play fundamental roles. At the other end, a lot of places hasn't had the impact. I think places like LATAM, in places that have been around for 100 years or so, where we've seen serious data functions established. But I'm wondering, maybe, Dawn, you can speak to this first, but how do you see the role of data scientists, data analysts, and engineers developing with the advent of AI now?
That's interesting. We've certainly seen a big change over the last 10 years, for example, in the type of roles that used to be called data science. And so we now have the AI engineer who was previously a data scientist or perhaps was a back-end engineer previously and has migrated into the AI engineering space, right? That you have the economist type of profile, which would have been in the data science category or was in the data science category at Uber, for example, 10 years ago. And those folks, just for clarity, are doing things like causal analysis to understand the impact of a new marketing campaign or other types of changes to our system that we may not be able to A/B test, or they're working on A/B testing technologies, as we already talked about. So you have those like two really clear categories that came out of data science, and then you have the category of what you might think of as product analysts, defining some of the KPIs, providing the data insights to inform strategy. And so I see those like three roles that all came out of what used to be called a data scientist. There are some other subspecialties like operations research scientist. I think that logistics companies still have these folks as becoming much more machine learning techniques being incorporated into that field. But that's what I've seen over the last 10 years.
I love that you're speaking to kind of the specialization here, because, I mean, it was even a few years after Jeff Hammerbucker and DJ Patel and then Tom Davenport popularized the term that people started saying the title data scientist may go the way of the webmaster, and then we'll have front end and back end and that type of stuff. And I think that's something you're speaking to wonderfully with that example. I also love that you mentioned from economics, import techniques to data science. And of course, at platforms, such as the ones many of you have worked on, this is essential. But it's a hill I'll probably die on, which is the more data scientists know about equilibrium, and when you do an experiment, you're perturbing from a particular state, and it may not actually reflect what you think it reflects, the better off we'll all be as a discipline. Andreas, I'm wondering what you're seeing, particularly in Latin America, with respect to the role of data science, data analysts more generally.
Yeah, so I think that we are a bit late to respect to the US in the changes. I think that the movement from predicting as the role of the data scientist to influencing is something that probably happened the last 5 years. Whereas I remember vividly in the US, probably 2015, was like, no, this is modern data scientist needs to do experiments, roughly. Now, I think that the door is open to translate some of those capabilities to AIs, which is a bit tricky because I think that AIs in the current state, like generative AI, provides probably three like strong forces, right? One, which is the most important one, is it's still a machine learning thing, right? So it still needs some kind of evaluation. It still needs kind of the focus of a data scientist. Like we need to make sure that we're influencing something, we need to measure it. If it's doing like its job or not requires some grounding, Those kind of tools need to migrate to generative AI, sure, as soon as possible, probably. The systems are not there yet, I guess. Like observability is probably very expensive. Like I've seen golden sets, like big golden sets, probably 1,000 rows, 10,000 rows, but I haven't seen 1,000,000 rows in a golden set. It's probably impossible. But then you have the engineering part, because and we discussed this at some point in another podcast. Like, it looks like an engineering piece. So one of the things that this opened the door for the engineers to start doing kind of these hybrid things, where they can combine data into their products and they can embed and build better products overall. They can think more as a product manager, from a product manager mindset. But probably what they are lagging is the concept of KPIs. Like you probably said, I think you said informing strategy. I don't think that engineers are there yet in Latin America, like thinking about like what's the next step in the product, why did this happen, etc. That's off the table, and we need to work on that. And the third one is this kind of, now everybody can do a bit of everything, and a bit is a very important word here. And this, I go back here to the verifiability of the outcomes, right? So what you want probably, and what we've seen in LATAM, right? Not what you want, but what we've seen in LATAM is that if you manage to align these automated workflows and their outputs, their technical outputs, with the people that can verify them quickly, the decision making is really quick. And that's where you see value, really higher bandwidth, better decisions, better products. If people, because they can produce an app, they believe that means that they can scale it in a brownfield code base, that's a problem, right? It's not a problem when it's a greenfield application that you can deploy in a very safe environment. Probably that's super useful, but you need to align the decision makers with the actual outcome of these automations. And that's difficult because it requires kind of an organizational challenge, which is really slow in big companies. Probably the talent team is we're going to have a nice discussion about this podcast 2 weeks from now. But that's a problem that I see. Like, how do we align this? People feel like really interested and happy that they can do code, and that's great, but they are not able to verify high quality code in a brownfield code base. They can't. Yeah, so that's the three things I see.
One of the fun things we're seeing at Delphina, one angle might be that you might worry that a tool like Delphina might replace scientists at a company because it can do a lot of the analysis that they otherwise would do. We're actually seeing in some cases the opposite, where now that you have this kind of platform where it makes it easy to do kind of trustworthy analysis, they're actually able to hire kind of more scientists and actually get way more done. The scientists can operate at a kind of a higher level, less wrangling of data, less kind of mucking with data quality issues. But kind of with an AI-powered tool, you can actually keep more of them busy and productive in really meaningful ways. That's really fun.
I know you're co-host here, Duncan, but I would honestly love to hear your thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, I think data science is such an interesting term because it's like an amalgamation of all of these roles, I think, as kind of Don called out, and these specialties. And in a lot of ways, I think that the title might evolve over time, but I really believe that data has been taking over the world and will continue taking over the world for a very long time, and that being data literate and taking advantage of your data is hard and requires some judgment, and that those kind of abilities will continue to be very high leverage. And so I'm not actually sure like how the kind of the label of data scientist evolves, but I think the capabilities imbued in data scientists will continue to be super important and ever more important as more and more of the world collects data, organizes data, and then tries to leverage it and needs to verify it in some way, needs to be able to sense check, does this experiment actually make sense? Does this optimization actually make sense? Does this forecast actually make sense? And so I'm very much a believer in the future of data science, although the word may change.
I love it. And I'm so glad you said ever more relevant, because when you said as relevant, where my mind went was with the pace of the acceleration of models and systems that can help us with this type of thing. Those skills, I think, will become increasingly important for data people and for everyone else as well. I think that's a fantastic note to end on, and a very optimistic note with respect to the importance of data. I just love to thank you all, Dawn, Andreas, Jeremy, and Duncan, the co-host with the most, not only for your time and expertise, but coming and sharing all of your wisdom as well. Thanks for such a great chat.
Can I jump in for a technical question that I've been
Yeah.
thinking about a lot lately? And I'm just genuinely curious to hear how you all think about this. GenAI is this set of tools that does an amazing job at next token prediction, right? And based on an incredible corpus that captures a lot of information about the real world. We still seem to need causality, and causal inference is this set of techniques that traditionally applied by the economics or statistics fields. And I'd love to hear how you think about. So I can ask an AI agent to run a causal analysis. I can absolutely do that. But the models themselves are not causal in nature. And so it's a generative model. It's saying, like, it's basically predicting what people in social networks think would be a good answer to my question, right? And so if you can prompt the AI in a clever way to tell it that it needs to go through the sequence of logic required in order to do a causal analysis, which you absolutely can do, and then you can validate at the end of the day, but you're just asking the AI to imitate a human workflow. The models themselves are not inherently causal. And so I've been thinking a lot about, is there a way to make these models inherently causal? What are your thoughts?
I'll actually just build on that slightly by saying not only are they not inherently causal, they're horrible probabilistically. And of course, they're probabilistic next token predictors, but they're horrible at reasoning under uncertainty is my real point. And I'm a Bayesian at heart, or I probably should say I'm probably a Bayesian at heart, or I'm very likely to be a Bayesian at heart. But I do think having systems which are far better at expressing uncertainty will help us with this causal question as well. And I'm not sure that these systems are actually equipped or even the right types of AIs to do this. But I'm interested in the group's thoughts more generally also.
I mean, my one answer is that is kind of what you said before, which is the AI kind of imitates a human, and therefore the way to approach it is to arm it with tools for doing causal analysis and let it do that workflow, which is where my head would go.
I would also say pre-training will be very important here because humans are generally horrible at causal inference as well. You all aren't, of course, but even in data science and data analysis more generally, causal inference isn't state of the art.
Something interesting there, Hugo, about how the models don't really learn on the fly, and that's probably a major gap in the current AI. And as you said, humans out of the gate usually aren't good at causal inference unless they've learned about it. And it's actually kind of a hard thing to learn. It's one of these, it's like a relatively difficult concept to get your head around. And so I do buy that, like, building a kind of super genius causal inference AI is very difficult with current technology. However, I'll also say that, like, it's been stunning to me how general purpose intelligence has just increased in the AIs over the last couple of years. And so 2 years ago, I would have said it's totally crazy. Today, it doesn't seem totally crazy. You could get a pretty good causal inference bot out of, the latest LLMs.
Human workflows for causal inference.
Correct.
There are enough documented workflows for causal inference out there that would work. I also saw a really interesting presentation at NeurIPS about building a transformer model for general purpose causal inference, which I thought was a very creative. It's a model that takes an arbitrary set of covariates, an arbitrary set of confounders, and an outcome variable, and attempts to predict the outcome variable based on this. And they just train it based off of large sets of simulated data with different causal relationships, which is an incredibly creative solution to this problem. And there's one monolithic model for causal inference.
That's wonderful. And where my mind did go, if I want to build some sort of multimodal search system, for example, over papers that have charts in them, I'll use a particular model to do image to text on the charts that's different to clip-based stuff. And where my mind did go is maybe smaller models or bespoke models for this type of thing. Another thing is maybe post-training. I mentioned pre-training. Maybe post-training needs to change. Maybe we want less apparent people-pleasing and RLHF style systems to do actually proper causal inference. One other place my mind went is, I do use LLMs to do reasoning, Bayesian probabilistic reasoning, but what I get it to do is write code in PyMC, essentially, and give me the output. And then I have templates which frame that in natural language to me as well. So I wonder what type of workflows and combinations we can build that have LLMs for the generative stuff, but for the actual meat that we really want, we use it to execute scripts and frameworks that we already know does that well.
Yeah.
So I have a question. I think I'm going to interpret the question a bit differently. So as the end result, what you really want is a system that knows what to say in order to influence you. That's what you want, really, not the analysis itself. So for instance, what I would want is to describe your past behavior in some way, and then I would ask the system, like, what should I tell Dawn to influence her in a way for her to, I don't know, like buy this nice family trip to the Bahamas, right? That's what I want. And I think that with the available tools, this is totally doable. You can actually make the language model kind of understand what kind of triggers an action in a human. I think that's doable. It is a deep learning model, so it should convert.
You're trying to bypass the inference part? Is that correct? Bypass the inference and go straight to the decision making.
Yeah.
That there's a decision being made off of the causal inference, and you want to do prediction of that decision instead of the inference.
Exactly.
Yeah, fair enough.
And I suppose that's how like certain forms of online experimentation have worked for quite a while now, right? There's the famous essay, what is it? We don't need science anymore because we have enough data. You put enough data through and it tells you what to do. Andreas, you asked the question, how can you get Dawn to buy a trip to the Bahamas? I'm now asking, how can I get Andreas to give me a trip to the Bahamas?
I need one interesting thing here. So if you want me to know that, I need actually variability on your data. Otherwise, I cannot distinguish if actually you are somebody that I should do this with. And that's an important point, because I think that when companies try to understand better their users, need this kind of variability. And if we're going to go like full granular, then what kind of interactions are going to be available for you, right? Because if it's one and zeros interaction that we're usually used to gather, I don't think that covers the ground. We need more variability, more differences to the granular level. But that's a whole new story for another podcast.
We'll have to have you all back, and I kind of want to invite Dawn back as a host, given the wonderful question and generative discussion her question just prompted. I'll link to the essay I mentioned as well. It was Chris Anderson's The End of Theory, The Data Deluge Makes the Scientific Method Obsolete. And I love that AI is bringing these types of questions. What can we automate? And what do we need science and knowledge and causal inference for in terms of making decisions? Because to Andreas' point, we want to make decisions. For some of them, we want to have an understanding of why we made those decisions as well, based on the data and our models of the world. Thank you all once again for such an interesting, thoughtful, and generative conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good to see you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks
See
for
you
having
all.
me.
Thanks so much for listening to High Signal, brought to you by Delphina. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to sign up for our newsletter, follow us on YouTube, and share the podcast with your friends and colleagues. Like and subscribe on YouTube and give us 5 stars and a review on iTunes and Spotify. This will help us bring you more of the conversations you love. All the links are in the show notes. We'll catch you next time.